All right, today we're going to tackle a question that seems super simple on the surface, but is actually one of the biggest, most complicated puzzles in all of sociology.
What is religion? You probably think you know the answer, right? But the moment you really start to dig in, that definition gets incredibly slippery. And how we answer this one question, well, it changes everything about how we study belief in our societies.
I mean, just think about the sheer variety of stuff we lump under the label religion. You've got everything from quiet, personal prayer to huge communal worship services. It can involve something like exorcism or even baptism for the dead. You've got beliefs in one god, many gods, or, like with some types of Buddhism, no gods at all. So how can one single word possibly contain all of that?
And this is where sociologist Joanne McGuire really hits the nail on the head. She talks about religion's dual character. See, it's not just one thing. It's this deeply personal, individual set of beliefs, but at the exact same time, it's a massive social force that brings people together, creates our moral codes, and can shape entire cultures.
So, faced with this massive puzzle, sociologists have come up with two main ways of trying to frame the problem and, find some answers.
And it basically boils down to this. On one side, you have the inclusive or functional approach. This one asks, what does this belief do for people? On the other side, you have the exclusive or substantive approach, which asks, what is this belief actually about? Function versus substance.
Let's start with that inclusive, functional view. People who take this approach, they're not too worried about the specifics of what you believe in. For them, it doesn't matter if you're praying to a god, honoring your ancestors, or even showing up every Sunday to cheer for your football team. If that activity creates a powerful sense of community, of solidarity, of shared identity, then they'd say it's functioning like a religion.
From this point of view, religion is basically any belief system that's based on faith. But, and this is a big but, this approach gets a major criticism. If your definition is that broad, you start seeing religion everywhere and nowhere, and the word kind of loses its meaning. I mean, does a passionate political movement count? What about a fan club?
So to counter that, you have the exclusive or substantive approach. This one really tightens up the definition. It says, whoa, hold on. To be a religion, you need some very specific ingredients. Things like a belief in God or the supernatural, a clear line between the sacred and the everyday, and ways to communicate with that supernatural world, like prayer. This view, crucially, would not count nationalism or sports fandom as a religion.
Okay, so let's imagine for a second we've actually picked a definition. You'd think the hard part's over, right? Well, not so fast, because now you have a whole new problem. How in the world do you actually count believers? This is where it gets really messy.
This brings us face to face with a huge paradox of modern life. You've got a whole bunch of people who believe without belonging. They have spiritual beliefs for sure, but they never go to a church or a temple. Then you've got people who belong without believing. They show up every week, maybe for social reasons or to see family, but they don't have a strong personal faith. So, which one do you count, the belief or the attendance?
And let me show you a perfect real-world example of this measurement nightmare. A survey in the UK asked Catholics, hey, how often do you go to church? The result? About 1.3 million people said they attend at least once a month.
But, and you knew there was a but coming, when researchers went and actually counted the number of people in the pews, they only found about 850,000. That is a massive gap. And it tells us something really important. People tend to, well, let's just say they over-report good behaviors in surveys. It makes simply asking people a pretty unreliable way to measure faith.
So even with all these challenges in measuring belief, we can still zoom out and see some really clear patterns when we look at who tends to be more or less religious in society. And one of the most consistent trends we see, especially in developed nations, is this. Older people consistently report higher levels of religiosity than younger people. It's a pretty significant gap. So what's going on here?
Well, sociologists point to a few key things. As people get older, they're often dealing with declining health, they're thinking more about mortality, and religion can offer a really powerful source of comfort. Plus, religious groups provide this vital social network, especially for people who might have lost a spouse or retired from work. And honestly, a lot of them just grew up in a time when religion was a much bigger part of everyday life.
And on the flip side, what about younger people? For many of them, traditional religious institutions just seem old-fashioned. They're seen as being out of step on important social issues, like LGBTQ+ rights. There's also just a bigger rejection of traditional authority in general.
And today, you have this huge spiritual marketplace of ideas, from mindfulness to New Age spirituality, all competing for their attention. Now, this leads to what I think is one of the most fascinating ideas in this whole debate. The idea that for younger people, religiosity hasn't actually vanished, it's just been rerouted. That deep human need for community, for purpose, for something sacred, maybe it's just being channeled somewhere else now. It might be found in a passionate commitment to a social cause, a music scene, or even the intense community of a sports team.
And all of this brings us to the biggest picture of all, the actual future of belief. For hundreds of years now, there's been this tension between religion and another incredibly powerful belief system that has totally shaped our modern world: science.
Sociologists often draw a pretty sharp line between them. They'll say religion is a closed system. It's built on sacred texts and on faith, and you can't really disprove it because its core ideas are seen as absolute truths. Science, on the other hand, is an open system. Its whole foundation is built on trying to prove things wrong. Any theory, no matter how cherished, has to be tested, and if the evidence doesn't support it, you throw it out and find a better one. And one of the giants of sociology, a guy named Max Weber, saw this playing out on a massive scale. He had this famous idea that as science explained more and more of the natural world, our societies were becoming disenchanted. The magic and mystery were draining away, being replaced by cold, hard, rational explanations for everything.
But here's the twist. Weber's prediction, it hasn't quite come true. Yeah, some parts of the world have become way more secular, but on a global scale, religion is still an incredibly powerful force. In many places, it's actually growing. The big, grand replacement of faith with science just didn't happen the way people thought it would.
Which leaves us with a final, really fascinating question that brings us all the way back to where we started. Maybe those early sociologists were asking the wrong thing. Maybe the question isn't whether religion is being replaced. Maybe the real question is whether that deep, fundamental human need for meaning, for purpose, and for community is simply finding new and sometimes totally unrecognizable forms in our modern world.